This is the Classic Auto Mall Show. Broadcast from the studios inside the Classic Auto Mall in Morgantown, Pennsylvania. Just 1 hour west of Philadelphia at Pennsylvania Turnpike exit 298. Featuring nearly 1,000 classic, vintage, and barn-find vehicles for sale under one climate-controlled roof. Now, here's your host, Classic Auto Mall president and the man with all the toys, Stuart Howden.
Welcome, show number 175. We've missed a couple. We've been off. We were off for Christmas.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Yes.
Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas.
Same to y'all.
Yeah.
Hanukkah.
Yeah, and any of those Kwanzaa.
All of them.
All of them. Politically correct.
Happy everything.
Happy everything. So before we get on with our fantastic guests that we have today, who wants to take a guess at how many cars we have in inventory today?
I do.
All right, go ahead.
Go ahead, Jim.
1,072.
I forget where we were. I'm going to say 1,040.
Wrong. 1,085.
Oh, winner, chicken dinner.
Highest without going over.
That's right. Exactly right. So joining us via Zoom this morning is a legendary race car driver, Hurley Haywood. Hurley, good morning, and thanks for joining us.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So a little cold weather getting down in Florida. You're down in St. Augustine area, right?
Yeah, it was down in the upper 30s last night. So it was, it's cold.
We always jokingly used to say in Florida, if it got down to the 60s, the women broke out the fur coats because, they don't get much chance to wear them down there. But, cold weather hits it kind of from time to time down there. So we're glad you're here and bundled up. And, of course, you were born in the cold weather, born in Chicago, right?
Yep. And, when I sort of got old enough to go, I went to boarding school at a pretty young age in Boston.
Right.
And so I went from really cold Chicago weather to really cold Boston weather. And then I went to prep school up in Vermont. So I went to really cold weather. And I said, after that was over, I said, I'm going down to Florida. I'm tired of the cold weather.
Yes.
We kind of wanted to get out of Florida for the hurricane season and the humidity. So we have a small farm up in Woodstock, Vermont. And that's really a nice reprieve to get out of this climate for a while.
Yeah, it gets, and of course, anywhere you want to move anymore, it seems like there's a stumbling block. Whether it's the hurricanes out there, the wildfires in California, anything, the cold and the blizzards up in, Buffalo just gets pounded up there. But it's interesting to end up in as a racing career when you're in the cold weather climate because yes, there's racetracks up in that part of the world, but maybe not quite as prevalent as in more warmer climes, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, that was the case. I started with Peter in 1969, and we won our class at Watkins Glen. And since then, my base has been in Florida. So I've lived here for a long time. And, we've got great tracks both here in the South and, all over the country and all over the world, really. So it's good.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and of course, you must have been destined for Porsches, right? With your uncle and the 356 I read about that he came driving across the lawn and kind of got you hooked right from that age, right?
Yeah, I remember so distinctly the sound of that car.
Right.
And it was, such an unusual sound and such an unusual shape that I just fell in love with it. And little did I know that I would end up owning one, actually.
Right.
So it was a pretty cool deal.
Well, and lucky for us, you didn't end up as Team Studebaker because I understand you learned to drive on a Studebaker truck. So
yeah, that was good training. That has a shift on the floor, and our farm foreman made a special seat and blocks on the pedals. So I started driving that truck when I was 12 years old.
Wow.
So it was, by the time I got my license, I was pretty good with the control of a car.
Sure. Well, I would argue that everybody needs to learn to drive on a manual transmission because, like you said, it's not just understanding the sequence, it's controlling a car. Much more involvement than there is today, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I do a lot of teaching with younger kids, and I always tell their parents, I said, don't get them a car with a manual transmission,
right?
Because then they're consumed with the proper and correct method to shift gears and brake and all that kind of stuff, where they're not talking on the phone. They're not talking to their, 5 other people in the car.
Sure.
They're concentrated on getting everything right. So, yeah, I'm a big believer in learning, youth, young drivers learning manual transmissions.
Sure. Well, and in a perfect world, we would have driver's ed that was really driver's ed. It would be more like the Bondurant or the barber school, where you learned how to drift and slide and you control a car in all kinds of different scenarios. And I don't think we'll ever see that for whatever reason.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So,
yeah.
But Porsche, I mean, what a great brand and mark to be connected with for all these years. And for those of you who don't know that are listening, Hurley, 5 overall victories at the Rolex 24 Hours of Daytona, 3 overall victories the 24-hour Le Mans, and 2 overall at 12-hour Sebring. Not to mention IMSA, IndyCar, and Trans Am, and Can Am, and everything else. Did you have a favorite series? Was Camel GT, IMSA back in the day the most fun to drive in, or?
Yeah, those early days of IMSA when, we had Porsche RSRs to race. There was a gaggle of them. So every race you went to, there were, probably 8 really good RSRs that were capable of winning. And, those were really fun cars to drive. The competition was really keen, and it gave the incentive to each team to sort of try to get a slight advantage. So it was great racing, and that was really the platform that I used to sort of kickstart my career. Peter, I started with Peter. I beat Peter at an autocross, and we became friends. And I was driving a Corvette. He said, the first thing you got to get rid of is that Corvette, and we'll get you into a Porsche. Basically, that's what happened.
Sure.
I made a really cool proposal to my dad about helping me finance it,
right,
with a clause that said I had to pay all the money back if I was successful, and kind of all worked out.
Yeah, well, and you didn't just have a regular Corvette, wasn't it a Nicky prepared Corvette?
Yeah, Nicky Chevrolet.
So
it was kind of a funny, the reason I got the Corvette was I originally, when I graduated from high school, I got a motorcycle, a Triumph motorcycle, 650 Bonneville. And it was just, I love that motorcycle. And my mother started reading all these newspaper articles about how dangerous motorcycles were, especially, in a congested area like Chicago.
Sure.
And so she said, okay, you got to get rid of that motorcycle, and we'll get something to replace it. And I said, well, okay, that sounds good. And so I kind of researched around, and I found this slightly used Corvette at Nicky Chevrolet, 427 side pipes, knockoff wheels, the whole 9 yards. And I told the salesman, I'm going to bring my mother down here to look at it. Wait, my dad was out of town.
Right.
And
good timing.
I told him, under no circumstances do we start this car, because it was pretty loud. And she said, oh, that looks like you. So that's what started my career. And
wow.
Soon thereafter, Peter got a hold of me, and away the Corvette went. I wish I had that car now, because it was worth a considerable amount of money.
Yeah. Well, not only that, but, old Porsches, which we'll talk about in a minute. But yeah, they're all, the value. If every car you had your hands on, you had still in a warehouse today, it would be worth, God knows what, right? It's
a lot of money.
Crazy the values on that. But would you have been into racing? I mean, that Porsche, was that the moment that did you know then you wanted to do something with cars, or when was the aha moment on racing? When did that hit you?
To be truthful, the racing part, I loved automobiles. I loved driving, and I liked all kinds of different, cars. But the racing part really never clicked with me in the beginning.
Right.
I had a really fast Corvette. I used to be unbeatable in the autocrosses here in Florida. And that's where I met Peter. And Peter came up and introduced himself. I beat him at the autocross, and he and I became friends. And he said, I think that you might have some talent to be a racing driver.
Wow.
And he said, I'll teach you how to be a racing driver. We'll go up to Savannah, Roebling Road up outside of Savannah, and I will teach you how to drive this car. And after the first day, I was quicker than he was. So he said, okay, this is good. So we started, we made a plan, and I actually owned the 911 that we raced at Watkins Glen, and we won our class.
Wow.
And it was a pretty competitive class. We beat all the Corvettes, all the big iron cars, Camaros, Mustangs, all those things. And I was sitting on cloud nine. I'm going, man, this is so great. This is the start of my career. And then I got my draft notice.
Oh.
And I was on an airplane going to Vietnam in November of that year. And so that kind of made a screeching halt to my racing for a little over a year. And I came back in 71 and started racing with Peter at VIR.
Right.
I got kind of a pass from the military base. I was sort of rotating out of the military at that point in Fort Lee, Virginia.
Right.
And the commandant of the base, the commander of the base, was a big racing fan, and he
Nice.
happened to come to that race, and he said, it was in the base paper the next day. Nate gave my name and said I was in the military, and I got a note that I had to go see the commanding officer that afternoon. And I said, oh, shit, I'm in trouble now. And he said, man, I watched that race. You did a really great job. We got to accelerate your departure from the military. And,
Nice.
I was out of there in a couple of months. So that was good.
Divine intervention, right? We get that.
Yep.
We find that back in of course, were Porsches, I know this is going to sound like a naive question. Were they somewhat easy to drive? I mean, I've heard that there's most of the Porsches, the 911s and the 936s and 5s and 4s and all that were somewhat easy to drive relative to some of the other cars of the day. Would that be true or not true?
Well, I mean, the way you drove a 911 sort of suited my style.
Right.
And we were always the underdogs because we ran in a 2-liter and under class, but we were also often up against the big high-powered cars, the Corvettes, the Mustangs, Camaros, and because we had really good stability in the cars were very reliable. We usually were able to run down the big cars.
Right.
And that's how we won those races early on with the 914-6.
Right.
And then the 914-6, we switched over to 911 in 73. And that was a really wonderful car. I mean, I enjoyed driving the RSRs. I enjoyed driving the 914s. They were all great cars, but the Porsches just suited my style of driving.
Sure.
For some reason. I don't really know why, but, with the engine in the back, you kind of, it was fun to be able to control it because I wouldn't say they were easy to drive because the high-powered cars were able to accelerate off the corner a lot better than we were. But because of our reliability and because we would just dog them to death and they would, finally just fade away and we would be able to pass them. So that was a lot of fun to be part of that.
Sure. Yeah. The reliability became, well, when you're in endurance racing, reliability is almost as important, maybe more important than top speed, right?
Yep. Absolutely. And the top speed was not that bad. I mean,
right.
if you go back to 73, which was kind of the start of, my name getting up in the lights was, we had a skinny, an RS, but it had the underpinnings of an RSR.
Right.
So Porsche wanted to make sure everything was going to work properly. So we entered that race as a prototype with a 911
Wow.
Prototype. And because the car was skinny, didn't have big flared fenders,
Right.
we had really good top speed. So we could, basically pretty much stay with the big cars on the banking. So that was fun.
And you had just a slight lead when you won that race, right? 22 laps over the 365 GTB4 Daytona Ferrari.
Yeah, Norbert Singer, Penske also had a car exactly like ours.
Right.
And in the beginning, all the factory guys were over in Penske's thing, and they kind of ignored us. And then their car had a mechanical problem and went out. And then I made a pit stop, and I suddenly see this sea of German mechanics. And I said, "What's going on?" And they said, "Well, Roger's out, so they're with us now." And then toward the end of the race, we had built up such a big lead that they tried to get us to slow down a little bit. And Peter said, "No, don't do that, because you'll get out of sequence, and that's when the problems start." So we just kept going. There was finally a sign that said, "Norbert says slow." that was supposed to be intimidating to us, but it didn't work.
Yeah, the boss man. Of course, same race that the Seagull flew into the windshield. Was that?
Yep.
Yeah. So, and I read that the bird was half in, half out of the car.
Yeah. And the windshield has splintered, so it didn't collapse. So I called in and I said, I just hit a bird on the back straight, and he's guts all over the place, and the carcass is halfway in and halfway out of the car. And they said, "Well, keep on going. If the windshield collapses, then come in, and we'll try to find a replacement for the windshield." So they found a guy, and they let us borrow his windshield, and the pit stop was pretty quick, and so we continued on, and the rest is history.
Was this some guy with a 911 out in the parking lot that you found his windshield? That's a hell of a story. I'd like to meet that guy.
I'll tell you a funny story. Dan Davis was down there, who was eventually one of the owners of Brumos.
Right.
And they went to Dan to get his windshield, because he had a 911S also.
Right.
Not a race car, but a street car. And he wouldn't let us get it. He didn't like Peter. And so they found another guy in the parking lot that had, the right car. And we talked him into letting us borrow the windshield, and, made him part of the team and made him feel good. And so, yeah.
Yeah, he's probably still telling that story today, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would imagine so. So, and they said, another funny thing I read about this seems like just a cast of characters race. Simoniz Car Wax wanted you to pit, and they were going to polish the car so it looked pretty in victory lane, and Peter or you or somebody said, no, God forbid the thing doesn't restart or something, and even though we're 22 laps ahead.
Well, that wasn't my call, believe me. That was Peter's call, because it was, a lot of money. They were going to pay us $10,000 to, bring the car in. They would take only, a couple minutes to do the polish. And Peter said, "No, we're not going to do it, because if we turn the car off, it might not restart again, and then we're out of there." So it all kind of worked out.
Well, and there was no money. I mean, no money in racing at all, hardly back then, right? I mean,
$10,000 was, more than we were going to win if we, had won.
Sure.
So, and we did win. So it would have been a nice bonus, but Peter said, "No, we're not going to do that."
Sure. And for those of you who don't know, Brumos Porsche, which we're referring to, is a Porsche dealership in Jacksonville, Florida. Although calling it a Porsche dealership seems to be a little unfair comment about it. It was much more. I mean, did the racing drive Brumos, or did Brumos drive? I mean, how did that? Was there a dog and pony and tail and wag and all that with Brumos? Then how did that work?
Well, Peter at that point owned outright the dealerships, and we were a Porsche dealership and a Mercedes-Benz dealership. And Peter loved racing, and he made a good impression on the Porsche factory, and Porsche factory liked him. So we were kind of like the quasi factory team in the United States in the early 70s, all through the 70s. And it was such an integral part of the Brumos name. And, Roger Penske once said to me, he said, your color scheme, when you look at any car that's painted up in that Brumos color scheme, they know exactly that that's a Brumos car.
Exactly.
I've had lots of wonderful sponsors, but, the name of Penske is not associated with a exact color scheme.
Right.
Brumos does have that color scheme, and when you look at a Brumos car, you see that paint scheme and it's a Brumos car.
And not only because it's red, white, and blue, but it's different red, white, and blue. It doesn't say, oh, it looks like an American flag, but it just has a feeling about it that it's hard to describe. It's just, it's an amazing color combination that works so well on that car. And like you said, the minute you see it, you know it. And it could have been on that car or a BMW or any car, right? I mean, that color scheme would have been recognizable as the Brumos colors.
Well, those colors never flew on any other car, on any other make of car. So they were different Porsches. It was on the 91710 that I drove.
Sure.
It was, it was on lots of different Porsches, but it was associated with Porsche, that
Right.
color scheme.
Right. Well, yeah. So not only just Brumos, but Porsche in general, whichever, like you said, was more of a team. Brumos was more of a Porsche, a factory team than anybody. But I think you once said the 91710 was the scariest car you ever drove.
Yeah, that, my reference to that was basically coming out of a 300 horsepower 911 with no considerable downforce, very, it was a huge jump. And the guy that really helped me get my head around it, Peter, was not helpful at all. He raced a car in 72. He didn't like it. And so he said, well, we'll give Hurley a chance on it. And Mark Donahue came to my rescue and he said, listen, this is a very powerful car. You can really get yourself in trouble if you don't treat it with a lot of respect. And, he basically said, you've got to, you got to be really respectful, and you got to take little steps, and you'll finally catch up. And that's exactly what I did.
Sure.
And I was third in the championship behind Donahue, Fulmer, and myself.
Yeah, and not a bad record for that. So did Porsches? I mean, when those 1,200 horsepower Can-Am cars were running around, did you prefer to drive the 911 with the lesser horsepower? I mean, was that just more your comfort zone versus these big high horsepower behemoths, or did you think, oh man, I'll just drive these for the rest of my life?
Which is pretty much what I did.
Right.
The 917 was a really good car to develop skill with, because you really had to think about what you were doing. You had these massive turbos in the back. You had 1,200 horsepower. You had big time lag. So you had to really understand when that boost would come on. So you would basically left foot brake and you would fan the throttle to keep the boost up. So by the time you got through the corner on the exit, you had boost and you would accelerate. If something happened during that, time from turn in to exit, and you had to lift too much, then you would spend an eternity waiting for the boost to come back up. So it was you had to really think about what you were doing, and the competition out there in the Can-Am was pretty good, and
right.
They had the best drivers in the world driving and in those cars, and here I am. Who the hell is Hurley Haywood?
Right.
And but it gave me the opportunity to impress Porsche, because they kind of understood where I was coming from. And I think that was one of the reasons why I got the invite in 1977 to drive the 936. So which I just love driving that car. That was a super car.
Right.
I wish the collection had one of those, because that's really a kick-ass car.
Yeah. Yeah. And wasn't the 935 and 936s, couldn't they be tuned into different classes during that era as well too, or were they all in the same class?
Well, the 935 was based off a platform 911. Right. So you had big wings. Everybody had, the Kramer cars. Bruce Levin had his own body work. But the 936, that was a prototype. That's the car I won Le Mans with in 77. And that was an open cockpit car. I really loved driving it. Didn't have, the horsepower that the 917s had, but it was, it was 600 horsepower. And that was a beautiful car to drive. I love driving that car.
Was it difficult racing in these long endurance races to get any kind of rest in between stints? I mean, could you close your eyes at all, or were you just so keyed up you just lay there and be wide awake?
Well, I knew that if you didn't get a little bit of rest, it was going to work against you. So, there was a protocol that you went through. You got out of the car, you debriefed with the engineers. You went with a doctor. They checked all your vitals and gave you liquid and gave you some food, and then they put you to bed. And they said, get some rest, because, you've got maybe 2.5 hours before we're going to come wake you up again. And so I had no problems, going to sleep right away.
Sure. Well,
because I knew that was going to work. If I didn't go to sleep, it was going to have an effect later on.
And did you do long stints? I mean, back then, did you do 6, 7, 8 hour stints at a time?
No, not in those cars. I mean, in a 911 in 77, I ran an 8-hour shift because my co-drivers didn't like driving at night. But I think that IMSA knew what was going on. Right. They figured that I was safer on the racetrack than these novice guys who were not used to driving at night.
Sure.
So they just kind of overlooked it. But with the prototypes and 962s, the cars were very physical to drive. So you really 2 hours for me anyway was about the limit. Right. And if you were in the car longer than 2 hours, then they could really see on the telemetry that you were slowing down a little bit. So I think 2 hours was a sort of the a lot of times you were in the car longer than 2 hours, but
right.
2 hours was where we're going to get the maximum performance out of the drivers.
Kind of the sweet spot, yeah. Well, and I think a lot of people don't realize in endurance racing, especially or particularly, is the fact that not only are you if you're in the top tier, there's a lot of slower cars that are in between you and wherever you're going, and that's got to be difficult to judge distance and how fast you're coming up on a much slower car and preparing for that. That's got to be a mental thing it's probably hard to teach.
Yeah, it is hard to teach, and it's kind of like playing chess, and you have to sort of plan your attack way in advance. So as you're driving along, whether it's Daytona or Le Mans or wherever you are, you kind of can see where the windows of opportunity exist. And when you're coming up to a slower car, you really don't know who's in that car because the cars are slow, are the glass is tinted. You can't really see who's driving. And every car has to be approached with the utmost of caution. And in those, especially in the long distance races, if you don't use caution and you bang into somebody, you're going to have to make a pit stop, and that's going to take too much time. So that, in relationship to what's going on today, the cars are so strong and the drivers can be so aggressive with those cars that it's just a whole new dimension.
Sure.
You've got electronics that are governing the the brakes, the shifting, the clutching, everything is done electronically, really. So the driver just has to steer the car.
Sure.
And make the right kind of decisions.
Right. The aimer, right?
Yeah.
So would you think, this is a hypothetical, obviously, question, could you be as successful today as you were back in the day with the newfangled technology?
As a simple question, no. Because the drivers today have to deal with a whole new platform of responsibilities. And because the cars are so electronic, you've got in the pits, you literally have 5 or 6 people looking at monitors. And the monitors are forecasting everything that's going on in the car. So the feedback of the driver, he is constantly on the phone with the crew members, with the engineers, and they're telling him, do this, do this, do this, do this. And I couldn't drive a race car like that. I have, my focus was 100% on driving. If that was interrupted, then I would get, off kilter. And, I had a standing rule with our pit crew that unless I was on fire, don't talk to me on the radio, unless it's something really, really important. And
we've heard some of the Formula One drivers tell their team, the engineer or whatever, leave me alone. I'm in the middle of a battle here, and they're just chatting them up on like they're just sitting there and having tea.
Yeah, right, exactly. And then I don't care if you're driving Formula One or any kind of car. If you got somebody talking to you on the radio that diverts your attention, then they're going to have a problem.
Sure. Well, and not only, they've got responsibilities that drivers back then didn't have. They've got all kinds of commitments that they have to do for sponsors. And I'm sure, that happened to some degree back in the day. But, and then they got the whole fame thing. Were you famous back in the day? Could you get through life and not be noticed as much as you might be today?
Well, I would, yes. In the 70s, I could, racing atmosphere, people wouldn't know who I was. But outside the racetrack, nobody knew who I was. And, but as time went on, that got, more, I became more and more noticeable.
Right.
And then, you had the book come out, you had the documentary come out, and that sort of ignited, a lot of people's interest. So it was, but that's just part of the game.
Sure.
You gotta deal with it.
Well, the book is, it's next in my line of reading. My first one was Kirk White's book, Don't Wash Mine, which is an amazing book about being a wheeler dealer back in the day. And then I've got your book, and then Chaparral, Jim Hall's book. But your book, 420 pages and 650 photographs. Wow, that didn't take a couple of weeks, did it? Right?
Sean Curlin was really something that was amazing with his devotion to getting everything right. And, we started, and, I think he was shocked when I said originally he was going to do a book on Peter, and that wasn't really getting any traction. And then, we were doing an interview about Peter, and he said, I'm not really getting too much traction on this. I don't know how this is going to go. And I looked at him and I said, well, nobody's done a book on me.
Hey.
And sort of the light bulb went off, and away we went. And, I'm very proud of that book.
Oh,
it really was. I think it's a book. You don't have to be a racing fan. There's something in it for everybody.
Well, that's what makes a good movie, they say, is you don't have to be a fan of whatever they're talking about if it's well presented and well done. And, of course, that book was amazing. And, of course, the list in the back of all the cars you raced, most of the cars that you raced in photographs, I thought the most telling one was the Datsun 200 SX. I never knew
I knew that you were going to mention that.
Oh, my God. I remember those cars. I think my sister had a yellow one or something.
I can't remember the guy that owned that car that asked me to drive.
Right.
I think it was at Daytona.
Oh yeah.
And it was every corner felt like the car was going to roll over on its roof.
like racing a Volkswagen, a VW van, right?
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
so good. Well, sorry to bring that up. I didn't, mean to. So I got to know about. I'll butcher this. I know Ecurie Escargot, the sponsor of your car. Was that 1977? The Team Snail was the inside thing on it. Kind of a play on Team Scotland that won Le Mans twice in the 50s, right?
Yeah. Well, these guys. We actually have that car in our collection.
Right.
And number 43. And it was an ex-Peter Gregg car. Peter had said to them, you can't use the paint scheme, but you can use the design of the paint, but you have to use a different paint color.
Right.
So I knew that was going to be a good car. Franz Blum from Atlanta was doing the prep on the car. So I knew it was going to be a good car, and that was the first year that the turbocharged cars were coming online.
Right.
And I just didn't think that the turbocharging had on a sports car had really worked out all the bugs. So when they came to me, the owners came to me and they said, "We want you to drive with us." I said, "Okay, I'll do that." And we qualified way the hell back in the field. I'm going, hell, man, what do I get myself into?
Right.
And then as nightfall was coming, they came up and they said, we really don't like driving at night.
Right.
And I kind of looked at them and I said, well, what am I supposed to do? Drive all night? And they go, yeah. So that's the 8-hour shift I did.
Oh, right. Gosh.
Yeah, so,
oh my God. So
it all kind of worked out.
Well, yeah. And you raced some other cars as well too. Obviously the BMW 3.0 CSL, which to me is as pretty a race car as you'll ever see. Was it easy to drive or hard to drive? Was that one tough?
No, it was pretty easy. It was, I only did that car, I think, 2 races.
Right.
One was Sebring and the other one was Watkins Glen. And it was such a departure from a 911.
Right.
This car was just a big car and had really good power, and the handling was pretty decent. So, but it was an interesting thing. But I was glad I didn't sign up for the whole year.
Sure. And then a couple of years with Jaguar, right? With the when you had your accident and
Jaguar. Actually, Bob Tullius called up Al Holbert, and he said, I know that Hurley can't drive a Porsche because he can't push the clutch down. He said, what would you think of me hiring him to drive the Jag? And Al looked at me and I said, if you can get Hurley to drive, that would be the wisest thing you could do, because he's one of the fastest guys out there.
Right.
And he can drive anything. So I signed up, and Bob Tullius and myself really had a nice relationship, and and the cars were, really great. Lee Dykstra was the designer, and those cars were fun to drive, sounded great, looked great. Bob everybody said, "Oh my God, you're crazy to drive for Bob," but he and I never had a crossword.
Wow. Yeah.
I would always do one little thing that was sort of not in the format, because he was a real fickle about,
right.
Everything had to be perfect. Your uniform, everything had to be spotless. Mm-hmm. And I would always do one little thing, and I know that he noticed it, but he never said it.
Never said a word, right? Well, they had a great livery back in the day as well too, like Brumos, and their preparation was legendary from what everybody said, to the way they prepared their cars, and like you said, the driving and all that. Of course, they were not the only ones. Penske was that way. There was a lot of teams that were, very, 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 details were very important.
Yeah, I think there was pretty much 3 guys: Roger Penske, Peter, and Bob with Group 44, and they set the standard for everybody else.
Right.
So everybody else, all the competition, saw when we came into the paddock, our cars were spotless. The uniforms the guys wore were spotless, and I think that motivated everybody else to get their act together. So as we went forward, more and more teams were adopting that
Sure.
protocol.
And those Jaguars, the semi-automatic, if you will, was it a paddle shift? Was it a regular gear shifter with no clutch? How did that work exactly?
Well, it was a Hewland gearbox,
Right.
so you had a clutch, but if you did the RPM right, you could do the shifting without using the clutch.
Gotcha.
And so that's how I was able to do it with my broken leg. And then the only time I used the clutch was to come in and go out of the pits.
Sure. Well, that made it a little bit easier on you, right? So some of the teams and drivers, obviously Al Holbert, when you just mentioned first overall at Le Mans in 1983 that was in the 956, right? The Rothmans, another great livery.
Yeah.
But is that the one where the engine seized and then somehow it unseized? What was the story on that?
Yes, that was what had happened. Was the door blew off on the Mulsanne Strait.
No, Al.
Oh, yeah. And Al called in and said, or I can't remember who was in the car at that point, but it was, so they brought the car in, they found another door, but the latch had come off, the original door, and they didn't have a spare latch. So one of the mechanics took their belt off and belted the door to the intercooler intake.
Right.
And there was maybe a half an inch variance, and it deflected enough air that it burned the piston.
Wow.
And so
that little bit of difference.
Yeah, it was amazing that would make that difference. But aerodynamics are an important consideration
Sure.
on race cars, and if something happens and that airflow is restricted, then you've got a problem.
Sure.
And Al was in the car in the last couple laps in the things. He felt the engine sort of start to tighten up, and he had enough fortitude to stick the thing in a lower gear, pop the clutch out, and was able to free the engine and basically crawled on that last lap to the start-finish line. Wow. And the thing blew up as it went past the start-finish line.
And of course, that's another one you probably wish you would have held on to. I think it sold at Gooding and Pebble Beach for $10.1 million or something crazy.
Yeah, yeah.
Are you watching this 917-022 getting ready to sell in just not down the road from you in Kissimmee coming up at the Mecum sale? I think it's on the 18th. The McQueen Le Mans 917 is going to go up for sale, and that ought to be an interesting result.
Well, we have a 917 coupe,
right,
in Brumos collection, and that's the Steve McQueen, the camera car.
Right. Wow. Wow. I've seen pictures of the Brumos collection. It looks amazing. There's the transporter and all that. I think I saw a thing that you did with the guy talking about watches, a show that you were on just not too long ago. We had Scott Pruitt on the show, and we were talking about how many Rolex Daytonas he has. And I said, "What's the coolest one you got?" And he goes, "The meteorite one." I go, "What do you mean? It looks like a meteorite?" He goes, "No, it's actually a piece of meteorite is the face of it."
He and I have a really good relationship with Rolex. We're both Rolex ambassadors, and Rolex really treats us well. And he's got a really beautiful collection of Rolexes. Rolex kind of 1991 was the first. This watch that I'm wearing right now,
right,
was the first watch that I actually won from winning a race. And then, so Roland Pouton, who was the president of Rolex USA, said, "We got to backdate it. So all the races that you won,
nice.
We're going to give you a Rolex for that.
Nice.
So anyway, they caught up. But,
good for them for doing the right thing.
Yeah.
I mean, Rolex.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Rolex ambassador, not a better business card, I think, anywhere on the planet, right? So some of the, I'm sorry if we're going too long. Where are we at, guys? We're, if you don't have anywhere to be, a few more minutes, and then we'll unleash you.
Yep. I'm all yours.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Some of the people that you raced with, though, talking about, Al Hobart, obviously, but, how about Preston Henn? That's a character of all characters of the T-Bird Swap Shop. Race team and driver, I guess team owner and driver back in the day. And
team owner, yes. And I never co-drove a car with Preston.
Right.
But what Preston did, he always had beautiful cars, well-financed. He was the one that introduced me to AJ Foyt. And AJ wanted to start his sports car, getting back into sports cars. And so he said, okay, we'll run the 250 at night, Paul Riviera 250, and you'll drive with Hurley. And so, I'm going, oh, my God, I'm going to drive with AJ Foyt. You're kidding.
Thanks a lot.
We got along great. And after that race, we won that race. And he had, he hired me to run, a couple races with him in the 962. And actually, Brumos bought the 962 from him, painted up in the Copenhagen colors.
Right.
And that was great. He was a great guy. He has got an incredible racing career, and he's also, he's just so full of stories that are just so incredible to listen to him talk about.
Well, I mean, to make your money the way he did, and then to, I never forget reading that Preston Henn sued Ferrari because they wouldn't sell him a LaFerrari. I don't know why they wouldn't sell it to him. Maybe they thought he was too much of a hillbilly or whatever, but got to be careful with those hillbillies. They always know a lot more than you give them credit for, right?
Yeah, that's the truth.
So, and we had Brian Redmond, like we said on the show a couple of weeks ago. I mean, arguably, you two guys are the greatest endurance racers ever. Is it something that back in the day? I mean, you didn't have cool suits, right? You didn't have a lot of the amenities that they have now. It's a tougher thing, but yet you guys also weren't doing workout regimens like these Formula One drivers, right? Were you working out at all back in the day?
Yeah, to a certain extent. Certainly not to the degree that these drivers are currently under, but yeah, we would keep ourselves in good shape, and we would, try to eat the right things, and it was a mindset. I think that Brian and myself had the same kind of mindset when we were racing in these long distance races. And a lot of people ask, what are some of the keys? I said, there's two things. One, you've got to be patient. So you can't assume that the car that you're approaching is being driven by somebody that really knows what they're doing.
Right.
So you have to approach each car with the utmost of caution, but not affect the lap time. So that's an important consideration. And patience is something that, a lot of racing drivers don't have. But for us in that era of racing that we were participating in, patience was something that was actually absolutely key. And the other thing that is important was to anticipate and adapt to the conditions that you were driving in. So a lot of drivers today get used to just one setup on the car, one condition that's perfect for their driving style. And then if something goes wrong with that, then they just go downhill.
You see that all the time.
Yep. And so Brian and I were able to adapt to any condition that the car was in. We could drive, a completely screwed up car without really affecting the lap time too much.
Wow. Because we
drove around the problem.
Right. I don't think a lot of the kids today would know that. And some of that comes with maturity, right? I mean, it just, some of these younger guys don't quite necessarily understand the mature level that it takes sometimes.
Well, as I said earlier, they're under a whole new set of responsibilities and pressures on their driving, because the driving now, it's like putting in a 24-hour race, it's like putting 24-hour sprint races together. And the guys have to operate like, there's probably 10 cars in the field that have the capabilities of winning the race.
Right.
Prototypes. And they're driving those cars at 100%. They're leaving nothing on the table. And that's hard to do for a 24-hour race.
Sure.
And that's why, a lot of those teams have 4 drivers, 3 or 4 drivers.
Yeah, you see the Daytona teams now all have 3 or 4 drivers when maybe they used to.
And not just drivers. I mean, really good drivers.
Yeah, right.
So you've got 4 really strong drivers that are driving, and that's what you need to win those races now.
And I would imagine a little checked ego needs to go in there as well too, because maybe you want to be the last guy driving, but maybe you're not the right guy to be the last guy driving.
Yeah, that they try to. This is a difficult subject to talk about,
right.
But you try to get guys that aren't trying to prove something.
Right.
They're not trying to prove that they're the fastest driver on the team. They're there to put all of the resources together to come up with a winning solution, and that's what they are targeting. So all of the egos are left on the doorstep, and their mission is to do everything as right as possible.
Right.
Don't make any mistakes.
I read somewhere about the Porsche rep who said to you that you're going to drive a really fast car, a car that can win the race, but you will not win unless you make 0 mistakes.
Yeah.
No pressure there, right?
I think that came from Professor Porsche himself. So.
Yeah. I think no pressure there. Just 0 mistakes. You can't even blink. And
yeah.
So your daily driver now, is a Porsche or even something more mundane, right?
I'm driving absolutely beautiful Targa, 911 Targa, S4.
Oh, yeah.
Beautiful car. I love the Targas. They look great. And it's now the weather is good, so you can have the top, open all the time. So
sure. And of course, I got to imagine that you've driven Porsches most of your life, right? I mean, as your road car or daily driver. That was part of the gig, right?
Yep, exactly.
Well, so awesome to have you on. And I'm so proud of myself. I didn't say Porsche. Does that make you cringe when people say Porsche, or has it gone past that and you don't care anymore?
Porsche, I mean, sometimes you're in a position where you can correct somebody, and sometimes it's not so cool.
Depends on who
that's not how you pronounce it. It's Porsche.
Yeah. It's you got to know your audience, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. So, Hurley, thank you so much for being on the show, and thank you to Judy Stropus for helping arrange it. And we'll look forward to seeing you. I'll come look you up down there when I want to come see that museum one of these days. It sounds fantastic.
Yeah, please do. It's a beautiful experience.
Hurley Haywood, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for being on the show.
The Classic Auto Mall has more than 1,000 vehicles for consignment in our huge 8-acre climate-controlled showroom. It's a real indoor mall. If you'd like to know all the advantages of buying and selling a car through consignment, the information is available on our website, or you can talk to a classic car specialist who can answer all your questions. It's easy, safe, convenient, and it doesn't matter where you are. We sell worldwide. See our huge selection of classic and collectible vehicles at classicautomall.com.
And we're back with the Classic Auto Mall show from the Classic Auto Mall studio after our little hiatus over holidays and Christmas. Did you have a nice Christmas and New Year?
Awesome, yeah.
Party it up on New Year?
No, just chilled out. Chill.
You don't have a car to go anywhere, so. Sorry to keep bringing that up.
No,
Sorry.
back in the Forester. So
you're back in the Forester.
Just good for snow, and that's the way it is. I miss my Mini though. It was fun.
I don't blame you. It was fun while it lasted, right?
Yep.
Well, another fantastic guest, legendary race car driver.
Yep.
Probably the king of endurance racing, really. The world's most accomplished endurance racer. You hate to say that to a guy because you don't want to embarrass him, but I don't think these guys are used to talking about themselves and their career.
I think he's okay with that. He wanted a book written about him.
He said, what about me? Yeah, he said, hey, there's a book right here.
There's a good book there.
Yeah. And off the air, we did find out that being from Chicago, he's a White Sox fan. So he's a South Sider.
He's a South Sider, whatever that means. And it's real windy in Chicago. That's all I know.
It's cold.
It's always cold.
Lake effect.
Yeah, the lake effect, snow and wind. So we won't get to our list of sold. I guess we could. I guess I could ramble through this really quick.
Okay.
3 weeks.
Go ahead.
Sold cars.
Oh, wow.
Manahawkin, New Jersey, Middletown, Delaware, DuPont, Indiana, Santa Ana, California, Riverhead, New York, Marlboro, Connecticut, Northport, Florida, Brainerd, Minnesota, Ponca City, Oklahoma, Newington, Connecticut, Lewisberry, Pennsylvania, Elberton, Georgia, Grantville, Pennsylvania, Washingtonboro, Pennsylvania, Thompson Station, Tennessee, long-winded, Woodbridge, New Jersey, North Haven, Connecticut, Hickory, North Carolina, Hesperia, California, Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, Rochester, New York, Stockton, California, New York, Wautoma, Wisconsin, Hampton, New Jersey, Downingtown, Pennsylvania, Beaver Creek, Ohio, Orange Park, Florida, Soudertown, Pennsylvania, Toms River, New Jersey, Santan Valley, Arizona, New London, Missouri, Jefferson Township, Pennsylvania, Reading, Pennsylvania, Cincinnati, Ohio, and Horizon City, Texas.
Were you doing the Oscar Awards?
Were you
playing them off.
Playing me off there? Okay, I like that. So
16 states.
16
that is
states.
amazing.
Yeah. So Hurley Haywood, I mean, there's 3 more pages of stuff to talk about. And what, so fascinating that he had such a long career with Porsche and with Rolex. And I love the fact that Rolex went back and gave him watches from the previous one. As he said, that was really cool.
I like the fact he's wearing the first one he ever got for a race. That's pretty cool.
Well, 1991, but then he got him back paddled.
Right, but I mean,
that's the one to wear.
I guess they last a long time.
Yeah, I
guess there's quality.
There's supposed the quality still remains while the price wears off, or whatever that saying is. I don't know. So some of the new arrivals. How about the 2012 Ford Mustang Boss 302? How many of those do we have in inventory?
We have 5 Boss 302s. We did a bunch of social media. Randy did a bunch of videos on them.
And you hate having too many bosses. So, give us a call.
Yeah, somebody pick up these bosses.
We got to get rid of it. Yellow Blaze Metallic Tri-Coat over charcoal. 1 owner. 1,617 actual
Put away.
Showroom new, 5-liter Roadrunner V8, Tremec, TR6060 manual, and all the documents and window stickers, which is important. If you're buying a car, I don't care if you plan on keeping it forever, if you plan on selling it in a week, if you plan on selling it in a year, whatever the scenario is, don't get rid of any of the paper. Don't get rid of any of the stickers that go on everything. Keep it all. It's all important.
Yeah, and with 1,600 miles, this person is obviously an enthusiast and put it away.
And bought it to put away.
That's right. And the underside of it is spotless. It's amazing.
Other new arrival, the 2015 BMW M4 Coupe, black sapphire metallic over black and Shakir orange. I'm sure I've pronounced that wrong. I'm a hillbilly from Tennessee.
That's all right.
I just do the best.
I don't know what that is.
Yeah, 1 owner, 69,885 actual miles, 425 horsepower, 3-liter, double overhead cam, inline 6, 6-speed manual, Akrapovic exhaust. Did I say that right?
It is. I think so.
All right. See, there you go. Dealer maintained. Other new arrival, the 67 Buick GS400 hardtop. I really like this car. Ivory over yellow. 3 owners, mostly original paint and interior. Got the numbers matching 400 cubic inch, 340 horse V8. Very highly optioned. They call these gentlemen's muscle cars.
Yeah, these are great.
They were grand touring. Like Hurley was saying about the BMW 3.0 CSL. He said it was a heavier, bigger car than the 911. So more grand touring, I guess, than out and out true sports cars.
Yeah.
So other new arrival, the 1913 Overland 69T touring sedan. Dark blue and black over black. This car is beautifully done. I mean, just amazing.
It is.
It's got the L-head inline 4, brass galore, stunning woodwork, solid.
And it was twice as much money as a Model T back in the day. It was $900.
Yeah,
which was a big deal in 1913.
My first iPhone was more.
Exactly.
We always say that.
My update was more than that.
Yeah, way more than that. Double that. I could have 3 of those, right?
Wow.
Other new arrival, the 1970 Buick Riviera hardtop, emerald mist over black. Cool car. 87,000 actual miles. Numbers matching 370 horse, 455 cubic inch V8. Numbers matching turbo hydromatic 400 automatic. AACA junior win. What an elegant, another kind of gentleman's muscle car here. It's maybe a little bigger than a gentleman's muscle car.
I'm a Buick fan.
Yeah.
But the more I write these cars, the more I'm convinced that Riviera is the most daring, exciting design from Buick.
And from the beginning. I mean, well, not from the beginning, but from the 60s when Bill Mitchell designed that beautiful, iconic 60s Riviera. Those were just cool.
And we have one.
And then we had the boat tail ones from the 70s.
Right. I mean, they're amazing.
They're just...
but yet I saw a YouTube thing that said one of them, I think it was the 72, they changed it and it had these bulbous fenders and that came out as one of the 18 worst looking cars that they had.
Sure.
He just wanted to say bulbous.
Sure. I know. Well, you know.
I use that for big hoods and stuff like
bulbous.
that. Bulbous hoods, bulbous rumps.
Bulbous-esque. How about, last but not least, this is an oddball. The 1969 Chevrolet Caprice four-door sports sedan.
Ooh.
Garnet red over black. 93,000 actual miles. Numbers matching. 427 cubic inch, 390 horse V8. And numbers matching the turbo hydromatic 400 automatic. Protecto plate, very original. 12-bolt posi. This is a four-door sedan.
And it will sell.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I mean, these things go quick, even four-door.
Yeah, but talk about grand touring. That's a nice lead sled.
And you just don't see many of those with the 427.
People love them. People love them. They buy these things up like
I know.
crazy.
It's funny, cars like that you know when they come in, you just know that they're going to be the next to sell.
Exactly. But
my dad had
this, it could be gone.
66 Caprice with a 6-cylinder.
Yeah. Way to go, Dad. Thanks for being cool.
Still collectible.
Yeah, still collectible now, you know. And it's funny, like Camaro SS convertibles that have 6-cylinders in them that we've had here.
Yeah.
Which you think nobody would order that. Yeah, some people did. They wanted maybe the looks, the spoiler, maybe the added accoutrements that the SS had, but they didn't want the V8. They were even cost efficient. Even people back then were fuel minded, even in the late 60s.
A little bit when it was 25 cents a gallon.
Yeah. Well, but I mean,
it was all relative.
My grandfather was thrifty when it was not expensive to do anything. You could go to Disney World for $50.
That's old school. That's old world stuff.
I told you my grandfather, my dad, and I went to Disney World the first week that it opened.
Oh, really?
In 1971, I think it was.
Yeah, I think
I would have been 9. And we went, and we all it was amazing. We all enjoyed it.
It was probably inexpensive at that time to get in.
Yeah, it was probably $8.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh, it's crazy now.
71, $8. Yeah.
You can get a glass of water for $8 at Disneyland, Disney World.
And they're selling like faster fast passes that are extra money on top of the extra money you pay.
Sure.
Yeah, it's like, we're going to charge you $180 a ticket, but if you want to wait 1 minute less, it's $380. Crazy. So I didn't get to talk too much about the upcoming sale of the 917 Porsche. We didn't get to talk price with Hurley to see what his thoughts are on what it's going to bring.
Well, I think he's looking at it because he's got the camera car in his collection. So it's going to up the value of that.
Up the value. And, but an amazing career, an amazing guy who had the respect of everybody that he drove for. And Peter Gregg was a complicated guy who started Brumos and, came to a bad fate. But it's one of those things that, all the characters in this hobby that we've met just so far. I mean, you look at Brian Redmond and all the guys that we've had on this show that are just so legendary. And like he said, he was known in the racing world back in the day, but since the book and everything else and the I think there was a YouTube video on his life as well. Somehow I missed that. So.
And we are now reposting many of the older shows, but they're coming up in order of being posted. So keep watching and get alerted. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel because as they come up, you will also be notified of shows that guests that we had that you might have forgotten about or not known about.
Yeah, our YouTube channel is really our go-to place now. That's where we're funneling everybody for the most part to go to because of the visuals, because of all the things that we can show them when we're talking about these cars that makes it a little more impactful as opposed to just hearing about it, which is great. I mean, I love the fact that people download our podcast and listen to it as well too. But I think you get the full Monty if you actually watch it on YouTube.
Yeah, good stuff. There's good stuff happening.
And you can catch it on our website as well too. We're posting all the YouTube videos.
And some of the car features end up in the car description.
And kudos to Randy, who is really upgraded our production value.
Absolutely.
Lots of photos and things.
Yeah. And another great day, another great year. 2025 is here with us, and we hopefully will miss all the snow again and just have another mild winter, which we have up here, which is really nice.
It was actually snowing while you were talking
Was it really?
Early, yeah, a little bit, little flurries, but nothing stuck.
All right.
Okay.
We'll catch you next week on the Classic Auto Mall Show. See you then.
You've been listening to the Classic Auto Mall Show with your host, Stuart Howden, executive producer, Steve Safier, Produced and engineered by yours truly, J.R. Russ. Available on ClassicAutomall.com, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Music courtesy of the Pat Travers Band. For tour dates, contact, and stuff, visit PatTravers.com. Produced by Car Smarts Media. Copyright all rights reserved.